to bring in our panel, former Obama White House senior director, Nayyera Haq, co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Dispatch, Jonah Goldberg, and CNN senior political analyst, Ron Brownstein. Nayyera, quite a night. So, I mean, as of now, it appears Democrats avoided certainly the wave, the tsunami, the shellacking, that whatever... Thumping. Did this happen because of Biden, despite Biden? What does the White House do now?
Well, the White House is certainly giddy from all reports because they were not expecting that Democrats would hold as strong as they are. Now, it's not a clear majority for either party right now, but Democrats ran local races, and all politics is local, whereas on the Republican side, the Trump nominees were trying to ally themselves with Trumpism and MAGAism. Democrats managed to make national issues like inflation and abortion, local economic issues, and they managed to distance themselves from the politics figures and make it highly localized. One of the things we also saw because of that, particularly in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin, was youth voter turnout. In Wisconsin, 350% more young people voted this year than the last midterm. For Fetterman, under the age of 45, voters overwhelmingly turned out for Fetterman, a candidate who is unapologetically progressive, campaigned on marijuana legalization. So these are issues that have been discussed in politics as progressive, but are really becoming mainstream public support issues.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of discuss. How much of what happened in Pennsylvania was Oz, wasn't a longtime resident of Pennsylvania and not a good candidate. And I mean, there's a lot of different factors in this. Jonah, how do you see?
Yeah, I mean, on the Pennsylvania one in particular, probably one of my favorite statistics of the whole night is that according to the exit polls, Pennsylvania voters were far more concerned about believed that being from New Jersey was a much bigger problem than having had a stroke. And I respect that in Pennsylvanians. As a New Yorker, I have similar views towards New Jersey. Look, more broadly speaking, I think candidate quality mattered, and Republicans had a lot of bad candidates. But also, look, the red wave happened. It just happened that Guam and Florida broke it, and the rest of the country went the other way. And as a conservative who doesn't like populism, doesn't like the Trumpy term, doesn't like the new right nationalism stuff, I'm fairly ecstatic about all of this. This could not have worked out better for taking the air out of Donald Trump's balloon. I think Ron DeSantis, who has his flaws, but is now the titular head of the Republican Party, and that's good news.
I just want to pause for a second. We've got a CNN projection. A win for pro-abortion rights advocates in Kentucky. Amendment 2 there has failed. That would have explicitly put into the state constitution that the right to an abortion is not protected. This is the fourth state that has now passed pro-abortion rights legislation. Back now with the panel. Ron?
Obviously there were individual factors in each race, and Democrats did succeed in many cases in localizing it. But I think there was a national story here as well, and that was that the coalition that turned out to oppose Trump in 2018 and 2020 largely held together. It eroded some around the edges, which is what you would expect with 9% inflation and a majority disapproving of the president's performance. But the basic coalition of young voters, people of color, college-educated whites, especially women in all of those categories, in state after state, they turned out in bigger numbers and gave Democrats bigger margins than either Republicans or most media analysts expected. And they, again, held those swing states, by and large, for Democrats. And, it is striking, Anderson, there were 5 states that made Joe Biden president, 5 states that flipped from Trump in 16 to Biden in 20. Arizona, Georgia, in the Sun Belt, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the Rust Belt. Trump pushed through nominees on the Republican Party in all of those states. And it is possible that all of them may lose, except potentially Kerry Lake in Arizona, potentially Herschel Walker in Georgia, and neither of them are guaranteed to win. There's a clear message there that there is not a majority in those states for the definition of the Republican Party that Trump has imprinted, has stamped on the party. But is anybody in the Republican Party going to be willing to say that? We'll see.
And it's interesting, though, because just 2 days ago or yesterday before votes started to come in, there were a lot of Democrats who were saying, look, the Democrats did not do it. They focused on abortion. That was a mistake. That's not going to drive people to the polls. They didn't have an economic message that really resonated with voters. You were praising the young people coming out. a lot of that was abortion on college campuses and places.
Well, I will make a distinction between voters, suburban mothers, women, and pundits, and those of us on cable news who were tracking higher polls that equated abortion and inflation separately. Abortion is an economic issue for women. Bearing a child, delivering the child, paying for childcare, all of that has a significant economic cost. Taking away the right to choose from a generation that has grown up with that being understood as just a given rallied them. We see that playing out in the states where every ballot measure that would have restricted abortion has been resoundingly rejected. So it's listening to women, listening to Generation Z and younger people about what they want as they are the rising majority in this country.
Yeah, Nayora Hook, Jonah Goldberg, Ron Brownstein, thanks so much.